Hey guys, Omar here for another Fuji X-T20 video where I share what I learned, my journey with the camera, any tips and tricks, I just give them back to you. And remember, what's great is you guys, your comments below, I read them, and anything anyone shares, I try to incorporate and also give back to you guys. That's what this channel is about, our journey together. So on a recent trip to Yosemite Valley, we had the opportunity to visit Ansel Adams' fantastic gallery, and his images are gorgeous. If you don't know who Ansel Adams is, where have you been? And he was a master at like using tones in the darkroom. He actually would make his blacks blacker if he wanted. He can change the tones in the darkroom. And now we do that so easily with sliders. You can do it on your phone. It's crazy. But I was inspired by him, and when we were in Yosemite, I was shooting JAW. That's a new format, JAW. I was shooting JPEG and RAW, and I decided to play with the tones in my camera. Your Fuji can actually make the highlights, you can change the highlights and you can change the shadows to match a certain look that you're going for. So I tried to make some dramatic black and white Ansel Adams inspired landscape shots by changing my highlights and tones. And I got this great shot that I love of my son running. My son is what makes the shot for me, but it is a beautiful landscape. And there's some forest fires going on in Yosemite, so it was very hazy. So I made the blacks very crunchy. Now, luckily, I also shot in RAW, which means I could take the image back in Lightroom and actually edit it and give it as much blacks and lights as I wanted to. Later on, though, I forgot to change the tones back to something that was more even, and some of my pictures came out, and I was shooting JPEG only, a little too crunchy, which was not so great. So it made me aware that I should watch my tones, I should reset them, and so I'm making this video so it doesn't happen to you. And let's first show you how to set your tones and maybe how they work a little bit, okay? All right, let's take a picture of Cap. So the first thing is I have highlights and tones set on my, my quick menu here. If you're not seeing them, what you wanna do is first get out of the quick menu, so half hold your shutter, and then hold the Q menu down, and that gives you a, hey, I wanna set my quick menu up. And what you could do is just decide where you're gonna put them, hit OK, and then it's got a long list. Just find the highlight tone and the shadow tone, and then you could have them on there to play around with. Now, changing highlights and shadows is a little strange. If you're using Lightroom or anything, usually if you go to the right or increase, you bring the shadows out. That means like you light up the shadows, which means the shadows get brighter. So adding shadow on Lightroom or any kind of slider, adding makes the shadows go away. But in the Fuji shadows, if you do +2 shadows, you're making the shadows stronger. So that took a little getting used to. So just know +2 shadow is a darker shadow than +1 or 0. If you have minuses on the shadow, your shadows will get brighter.
You're doing great.
So let's make the shadow minus. So if I go to -2, their cap looks all pretty and nice. And if I hit my quick menu and I go to shadows, let's do the extreme 4. You see the shadows are very, very, very black, okay? Same with highlights. If I go to highlight tone +4, that's making everything that's very bright and white in the scene, it'll make it even whiter, like his shield and his stripes. If I go to -4, I think it only goes to -2. -2, then it brings down the whites. Let's make a very flat image here. If I go to the Q menu and I go to shadows -4, oh, -2, sorry. You see how everything is very pretty nice? Now let's say you get a look that you like, you should probably save it. So what you wanna do is, if you like this, you kinda wanna just, with the quick menu open, don't go away from the quick menu and hold down the Q button, because that just makes you customize your quick menu. Instead, what you want to do is you want to be in the quick menu, and we're going to basically change one of these, our custom functions. So what you do is you hold down the Q menu and it gives you, hey, which one do you want to save for? So if, like, for example, I like that, I want 7, I go to the right and I pick everything I want. There's my highlight and shadow. You can actually pick the highlight and shadows that you want. You can change them, and once you change them, you hit okay, you hit back and it says, hey, you want that? And you're like, yeah, that's cool, I like that. So now basically when you go to number 7, when you go to number 7 here, that'll be saved for you. All right, so let's jump into the computer and I'm gonna show you some images and what I did to kind of play around with shadows so you can see. All right, guys, so this is the shot that I took of my son, again, using the tones right from the camera, inspired by Ansel Adams. I used a red filter on the sky. If you use a red filter on the sky, it actually brings the blues a little darker, which is great. But it makes you think, you know, if you're really serious about producing and editing your work, I think I want to get JPEGs that are close, but if I want to edit images, I think I would bring them back into an editing program. Now, Lightroom is notoriously kind of bad at reading Fuji RAWs. There are other ones that are better. A lot of people say Iridiant Developer is great and that Capture One is doing an amazing job. Right now, for my professional workflow, I'm super quick, things going into Lightroom and coming out, so I really don't want to change right now, but in the future, probably. All right, so here's an example of, I'll show you how you can shoot. I'm going to reset this because this is the raw file, right, you know, into Lightroom. And what you could do is you can actually put your own tones on it. You know, just very simply, I have presets and anything that you like for example, here's one of my black and whites with grain in it. And a lot of these presets get me close and then I kind of fine tune depending on what I want in the image. But you should save everything as a preset, things that you like my favorite one, Awesome Sauce. There you go. Down here in black and white, I could change the sky by, you know, taking this blue slider down and, you know, any kind of blue, just bringing, ooh, I like that. So I can change that later. And then I can use a, you know, you can either use the ones up here. I barely ever use contrast, but shadows, bring the shadows down or up. This is what I was talking about, the sliders down or sliders up. But you can actually bring your blacks, and clarity is awesome at bringing your blacks up and down, you know, giving you that punch if you want to give it some clarity. That kind of works in the midtones to darken them up. But you can also use your curve. You can actually just either, you know, slide this, you know, pinch and pull this curve to give you the different darks that you want. The left side here is the darks. If you notice, the sliders are doing that. And the right side here is the highlights. You can push those up if you want the whites to be as white as possible and the darks to be dark as possible, okay? So that's something you can do. You can control the tones of your image after. Can we do that on a JPEG? Absolutely. So let's go to the image before. Let's make sure it's all reset. This is the Acros film simulation right from the camera. But hey, I could add clarity to this if I wanted to make it darker. If I wanted the whites to be whiter or bring down the whites, I could do that as well. You just have more leeway with RAWs, but you can always fix your black and whites in Lightroom even after they're done. All right, so then I started walking around my neighborhood and I saw this plant, very contrasty scene. And I basically shot 0 highlights, 0 shadows, and you know, the shadows are a little dark. So then I started to increase the shadows. Here, shadows +1, and basically the blacks are getting blacker here, where this one is +2, this one is +3, this one right here is +4 shadow. So it starts to get really disgusting in the shadows, and then bam, just like that, the same scene, I took shadows -1 and it kind of flattened out the image and brought those shadows out. So before you take your picture, you can actually fix up those shadows. So that's -1 on the shadows. And then I experimented with others. I won't bore you with it, but for the most part, this one right here is -2 on the shadows. That means I brought the shadows brighter. And then -2 on the highlights. So I brought the highlights down a bit. All right, and then I walked up to this red car, and what are you gonna do when you see a red car is make it black and white. So this right here is zeroed out. And this again is a very contrasty scene where there's a lot of highlights and a lot of shadow, and the camera's kind of struggling between the two. But I decided to see, hey, what would happen if I did -2 on the highlight and -2 on the shadow? So shadow is easy to see here. We go from a dark area to it got brightened up on that -2. But here, let me show you the highlights on the hood of the car. This is the camera at 0 for highlights here. And then here I did a -2 on highlights. So it kind of evened out the exposure. And this starts to get a little flat, you know, your exposure gets a little flat. So I decided to see what would happen if +4 and +4 on both. So now the highlights are like crazy bright and the shadows are crazy crunchy. Now this doesn't work for this image, and that's the other thing I found is if I went into full shade with +4, I got some interesting and good results. If I tried +4, obviously in a contrasty scene, the image just didn't work, okay? So for example, I just moved down to the rim of the car. Here on the tire, +4 for the highlights and +4 for the shadows gives like a very crunchy scene. It lets a little bit of flare come in just to make it interesting, which was cool. And here I flattened out. What I did here for this one was I did -2 on the shadows. So I brought the shadows out and now the image is kind of flat. Picture Acros film simulation of a wood door, 0 shadows, 0 shadows, 0 highlights. And then I decided to crunch up the blacks, make them +3 here. So you can see it brings out all that wood grain. So maybe when you're going to take a picture of something, you think, you know, if it's black and white Acros, you think it needs a little bit more crunch, a little bit more black. Put pluses on your shadows and you'll get nice little blacks in there. So this is a perfect example of how you can separate your subject from the background. So this is kind of like flat out with the shadows maybe up +1. I can't remember what I did here, but I know that I let the shadows come up a bit. The shadows are in the background. These little leaves in the front are the foreground, so they're a little brighter. And then here, you know, make the shadows really crunch up. This is probably +4 in the background. And then your subject stands out from the background. So if something's a little darker in the background and your foreground is nice and bright, you can use tones to really highlight what you want your viewer to look at. So that's what I did here, which was cool. This one, again, flat, didn't really work, and I started to use tones. This one +4 on the shadows just to get them really crunchy. And here I had highlights at -2 because these little dudes were sort of a little too bright. Maybe this is what you're going for, but here they were a little too bright. And so here I kind of brought the highlights down to keep those guys under control as far as the highlights go. So either one works. You know, maybe you're going for more dramatic, which is this one's a little bit more dramatic with maybe that's what you're going for, and that's what's great. You can pick the tones that work for you. Okay, this is standard film simulation. This is like this is on the sidewalk, a little water plate thing that's all grungy. You know how I like the grunge. This is standard film simulation, everything's zeroed. And then what I started to do was mess around. So this is Velvia. And what I did right now was I took Velvia and I increased the shadows by +2, which looks really cool. And then I moved to Acros, and the first thing I did for Acros was I did +2 on both, and I was getting that nice crunch that I was liking. And I was like, let's go even further. I +4'd those shadows. So 2 and then 4 gave a really awesome crunchy black, and I thought that was interesting. Now note, this won't work really great with people and skin because it's gonna be like, but with objects and rust and old bicycle, that kind of stuff, that might work great. And then here, what I decided to do was, let's see what Acros does at 0, and to me, since I was looking at so much +4, it started to look a little flat to me. So I think a lot of people, from what I've read, that use Acros definitely add a little shadow to it to make it very dramatic. Then I decided to change to black and white, just plain black and white, and that really looked flat to me. So, but you can sort of mess around here. This again is Acros +4. So again, start playing with your tones. This one has a lot more highlight in it. So I boosted the highlights to +4, shadows to +4, and it's like really surreal and crazy burnt out film look. Love it. Here's a classic chrome with nothing on it, 0. To me, looks a little flat. If I brought this in, I would add clarity. I would add, highlights and tones. So I'm finding that the tones are interesting. I'm going to play with them more and pick the ones that work for me. And maybe you could do the same to you, for you, and let's see where it takes us. All right, guys, I hope that helped you a little bit understand shadows and tones. Hopefully doesn't happen what happened to me, which is too crunchy of a black, and then I was trying to fix the JPEG. What a mess. Anyway, Be aware of your tones and save a look that you kind of like based on your editing. Maybe you like the shadows not so crunchy. Maybe you like black and whites that are like, "Ugh!" And so put that in there and have that saved as one of your custom functions, and then you're ready to go shoot. All right? All right, see you guys next time.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.